Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to our session this afternoon. Today, we're looking at relevance in the regional conferences in Seventh Adventist Church. And we have a wonderful panel that we are blessed to have with us today. My name is Robert Johnson. I'm the head elder for the Northeast Seventh Adventist Church here in Charlotte. And it's my pleasure to be the moderator for the panel today. So for the past 3 evenings, our pastor has led us through an interesting discussion. We've been looking at the Adventist documentary entitled Wound, looking at race and racial relations in the Adventist Church. And today is sort of the culminating experience of that, where we have brought an esteemed group together from across the country to explore regional conferences, where we are, how we got here, where we go from here. So what I'm going to do is ask each of the panel members to just give a brief introduction of themselves. If you would, tell us just who you are and what you do, since I don't have bios for you. So just give us a brief synopsis of who you are and things that you're into. And as a part of the introduction, so you've all been invited to be a part of the panel today. You know what the topic is, and obviously there's something about that topic that speaks to you. So what has drawn you to be a part of this discussion today with respect to regional conferences? So I'll tell you what, Pastor Edmonds, I enjoyed your sermon today. That was a powerful message. Thank you so much. Let's start with you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Elder Johnson, Elder Willis, for including me on this very eclectic group of workers and scholars and all other kind of people. It's my privilege. What has drawn me to this panel is I think it's very important to tell the story of regional conferences, which is one of the major success stories of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, particularly the North American division, in the past 75 years. The challenge is most people are not aware of the details of that story and the benefits that regional conferences have been to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so it's very important to me to be a part of a discussion that pre-COVID, I was a part of every week in a different church in the North American division. So I'm happy to restart that conversation with this group today.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Elder Grissom, let's go with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what's drawn you to this topic today.
Well, I'm Beth Grissom. I am the head elder at the University City Seventh-day Adventist Church. I also work at the Carolina Conference, Women's Ministries Director and Prayer Ministries Director. I was just asking my parents today because I wasn't sure, but I am 5th generation Adventist on my mother's side and 6th generation Adventist on my father's side. So, the whole reason that I'm here today is because Pastor Willis invited me and I said yes. But more than that, I just love this church and love the message that we have to give and want to do everything I can to be a part of making sure that we are growing to be a healthier church all the time. And I think this is a very important topic. And I listened to a podcast a long time ago, pre-COVID, that Pastor Willis doesn't even know this, but that he was a guest on, and where he talked about regional conferences. And Elder Edmund, you are completely correct. We need to know the history because I didn't know much of the history before that. And as I learned more about it, had a very different view about regional conferences. So anyway, just happy to be here. And I'm just thrilled to be part of this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. We're happy to have you with us today. Dr. Freeman, how about you?
Thank you so much, Elder Johnson. My name is Dr. Sidney Freeman Jr. I just a little bit about me. I'm originally from Camden, New Jersey, a son of Allegheny East Conference. I've gone through pre-K through Oakwood Adventist Christian Education. I'm a professor at the University of Idaho, so I'm in the Upper Columbia Conference here in this region. But in the last few years, I have been doing historical research with regards to a gentleman by the name of Dr. Owen Troy Sr., and he is one of the success stories within the regional conference work. And so to be able to talk about the regional conference is what its history has been, but also its future is something I always like to engage in. So I'm thankful to Pastor Willis for this opportunity.
Great, great. Thank you so much. Pastor Ryan Hodges, let's jump down to you.
Yeah, I'm a youth and young adult pastor at the Sharon Seventh-day Adventist Church here in Charlotte, which is a part of the Carolina Conference. I'm actually Canadian by birth, so I'm an immigrant. I'm not from the United States, but it's been interesting because I've lived all over the world, and I actually had more culture shock moving to the southeast than living in Peru or Australia. And part of that was coming to a place where there is some racial tension and stuff like that. And that was never a part of my life in Canada. Canada's a very diverse place. And so that was interesting to start experiencing. And honestly, I didn't even know about regional conferences until I was in college because it just wasn't something that was mentioned in Canada. There's only really there's a union in Canada, and then there's just conferences per province there. And so it was a different idea to me. So I had to learn about it from hearing from different people, from seminary brothers and stuff. And so I've had an interesting experience because it's something that I've had to ask questions about. At first it sounded to me like it was some form of segregation. And I was like, well, what is this? And I take the stance at first of what a lot of my Caucasian brothers did was, well, we don't want segregation. And then I started to talk to some of my African American brothers, and they had a totally different viewpoint. And I was kind of interested in that. So in learning the history and different things like that, and about representation and things, my picture of it broadened. So.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Pastor Willis, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? And this is part of your brainchild. So what brought us here today?
Yeah, so my name is, as my head elder alluded to, Pastor Evan Willis. I am a pastor here at the Northeast Seventh-day Adventist Church, located in the Hidden Valley community of Charlotte, North Carolina. I, like Sydney, like Dr. Freeman, am a son of the Allegheny East Conference. Today, I spoke at for alumni weekend at the church school that I attended, and I was reciting the Allegheny East Creed. And so I've grown up in regional conferences. My grandfather was a pastor in regional conferences. My great-grandfather was in the meeting where they voted to do regional conferences, and he was instrumental in getting things started. And so I think I have deep family ties with this regional conference reality that I appreciated. So I am having this conversation, I think, because so often we have this conversation, but we have this conversation in silos. Like, we talk with our Black friends or white people talk with white people about it, and we don't ever come together to have a conversation. And two, I think so often we have a conversation that is what I would call in the mud, or we have a conversation in the trees instead of looking at the forest. So the conversation oftentimes centers around, I think, white fragility and white guilt about the regional conferences being in existence. And we don't have a conversation really based around mission. And so I thought it was good to have a joint conversation where we could talk about the relevance of regional conferences 2020, the mission of regional conferences to reach Black America in 2020, and how we go about doing that. But also, we cannot do that until we have a broad conversation about history and move our way forward into the future.
Okay, very good. So let's, I guess let's kind of take a step back and take the old Stephen Covey approach, and let's ask. So if we go from the end, let's start with the end in mind. What would you hope would come out of this discussion today? Even though we haven't had one yet, haven't had a discussion, we've heard something about you, and it's been interesting to hear how people heard about regional conferences. And I was talking with the pastor the other day, and he was telling about his great grandfather and some of the stuff he was just learning since he was like, 20, 21, 22 years old. So, if you could look ahead at the conversation we're having, what do you want to come out of this discussion today?
Well, I can jump in. So when I heard the title, "The Relevance of Regional Conferences," I thought about an article I wrote about three or 4 years ago with a colleague from Fisk University. Her name is Dr. Crystal DeGregory, and the article essentially pushed back on the question of why are HBCUs are if HBCUs were relevant, and so we flipped that on its head and said we never ask if predominantly white institutions are relevant. And so, as a person that is a part of a state conference, as we would call it, in some ways, I push back on the notion of even asking if they are relevant, because we see that the history of the movement, which I would call the movement of regional conferences. It's more about how can we serve even more people rather than the relevance of us. We have been relevant and will continue to be. We just need to continue to tell our story so that others will know, in particular, our children will know of the rich history of the work that we've done. So I would hope that people would leave here energized, inspired by what regional conferences have done over the years and think about ways in which to support the advancement of it moving forward.
Yeah, I want to second what Dr. Freeman said, although I probably can't say it as well as he said it. But it sort of reminded me of an experience I had when I first accepted the call to be the executive director of the Office of Regional Conference Ministries. Oakwood asked me to come. Dr. Dedrick Blue, who at that time was the dean of religion and theology at Oakwood, asked me to come and answer the question that we're kind of discussing today, and that is, let's discuss the relevance of regional conferences. Now I'm having this discussion at Oakwood, which is the largest African American institution we have in the Adventist Church. But he asked me to have a conversation with the theology majors. And he said, Elder Edmund, I need you to tell them why regional conferences are relevant. And so I opened my talk by saying I'm an alumnus of Oakwood. It's an honor to come back. Happy to have this conversation. But I said I was a conference president for 7 years, and I sat on the board of Southern Adventist University as well as the board of Oakwood University. But when I sat on the board of Southern Adventist University, there was never a time when anybody said, let's have a discussion on the relevance of state conferences. Why do we still need state conferences? And so, like Dr. Freeman, I'm hoping that what will come out of this is an understanding that moves us away from the idea that state conferences are the norm and regional conferences are the aberration. That we really don't need to explain ourselves, even though we will. But as I said, regional conferences are one of the great success stories. In the last 75 years, regional conferences have grown 4 times faster than state conferences. And so, so to have this discussion is good, but it just points out the need for education.
So, yeah.
Can I chime in as what we may need to do in the future, and this conversation may be relevant here as well, but I think the education may need to be more so present among Anglo congregations, because it's mostly what I see is the Anglo people that don't understand the history, that don't see the effect that regional conferences are having. And even if you look at the numbers, like how many members in just the last 60 years, or 80 years since the regional conferences have been established, that's substantial growth. And I don't think without the regional conferences, we wouldn't have that growth, at least to that extent. So there needs to be, I think, that understanding preached maybe more in the Anglo conferences than in the regional conferences.
Okay. Interesting. So we've had an additional panel member join us today. Is that right, Sister Esperanza? All right, good to see you. So, but before we go forward, let me give you a chance to introduce yourself. We started off by simply asking your name, give us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what has drawn you to this discussion today, this particular topic today.
Apologize for my tardiness. Lots of technical difficulties, but now they're figured out, so we're doing good. Everyone hear me okay?
It's a little choppy.
Okay. Technical difficulties I thought were figured out. Can you hear me now?
That's a little better, yes.
A little bit better? Okay. Okay. Try this out. So, yeah, I'll continue and just let me know whether or not we're good. So as you can see, technical difficulties, but we're here now, and I hope that the sound is better, because I really want to be a part of this conversation. I was raised within this denomination, and even more so, the majority of my spiritual formation has taken place within the context of regional conferences. And so in observing the dynamics in our denomination when it comes to regional conferences, et cetera, I just have a very strong investment in, I have a lot of skin in the game, so to speak. I went to Oakwood University, where I studied theology as well as English professor's writing. One of the best decisions I ever made in my life by far. Currently, I am completing a master's degree in intercultural studies at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. And following this, I am pursuing a doctorate in sociology, because I am integrating my theological studies with social change theory analysis in regards to anti-racism. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, and also in terms of location, I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. Like region.
Great. And so we're exploring the question of starting with the end in mind. So I was asking, what do we hope to get out of this today? We've got an audience out there. What do we want them to take away from this discussion? So we've had a couple of comments from Dr. Freeman, Pastor Edmonds, and Pastor Hodges. And as I'm listening to these comments, so that this term relative and relevance keeps coming up, and there's sort of this unspoken part of the question when you began asking, so what's the relevance of regional conferences? And the unspoken part is with respect to, or compared to, or relative to state conferences. So as Dr. Freeman was saying, hey, nobody ever asked about the other side of that coin. What's the relevance of white schools or state conferences? But that's kind of the silent part of that question. As I'm hearing the discussion take place here. So I don't know. So Elder Grissom, you got any thoughts on what you want to see happen as a result of this discussion today?
Well, I think better understanding for those out there. I'm hoping that there are going to be a few more of my Caucasian friends who are watching. But, you know, ultimately, I think the main goal all of us have is to spread the gospel, right? I mean, that is why we are all here. And the however we can do that better is what we need to be doing. And I think too many times we get hung up on the structure and maybe not so much about how do we work better and how do we work better together. And I'm, you know, I know that we have had a lot of conversations and at different times. I know, you know, I don't have to go very far for someone to say to me, why do we have regional conferences? We shouldn't have regional conferences. You know, we shouldn't be doing that anymore. And we almost see it as a stain or a scar. And I think we've got to get past that and educate and understand better and see all that has been done. And, you know, did they came about being because of terrible things that were going on? Sure. But we need to see how the Lord's been working and keep moving forward and keep working. And, you know, I was telling my husband the other day, you know, scars are something that we often just want to get rid of because they make us feel uncomfortable. But sometimes those things, I mean, even Jesus is going to keep his, right? And so I think that can be when I mean scars on what the racism that has been a part of our country, and because of that, our church.
So as Elder Edmonds was describing it earlier, and also Dr. Freeman, I think they both use the term success story. Let's kind of step back for a minute, and I'm going to ask Elder Edmonds if you would give us a synopsis of sort of, you know, why we're here. How did we get here? I mean, what's this whole regional conference thing all about? So we've got people even on this panel who are saying, you know, their families have been Adventists for multiple generations, and they're just learning, just hearing about the idea of regional conferences in recent years. So help us out here. What's the background behind regional conferences?
Well, let me share my Adventist roots as well. My grandmother heard the message from Edson White on the Morning Star in Vicksburg, Mississippi. So I'm very proud of my Adventist heritage. Growing up, I had the privilege of growing up in a family where everybody in my family on both sides were Seventh-day Adventists. So this church has been a very important part of my life, and I'm very grateful for my Adventist heritage as well. The whole idea of regional conferences was born out of two ideas. One bad, one not so, one good, and that is the bad one was, as much as I love the Adventist Church and as much as I love the United States of America, the harsh truth is both of them have an ugly past with racism. They both do. And so part of the reason why regional conferences started came out of it was born out of an ugly racial incident. Lucy Byard, a Black woman who was very light-skinned, being being admitted into Washington's Adventist Sanitarium. When they discovered, they thought that she was Caucasian. When they discovered she wasn't, they unadmitted her. They in essence kicked her out of the hospital and sent her to Freedman's Hospital, which ironically enough is now Howard University Hospital, which is now an Adventist, is part of the Adventist hospital system. That was kind of.
Can you give us a time frame on that? I mean, how far was that?
Yeah, that incident happened in 1944. It was exacerbated by, and this story is told in a very good book by Calvin Rock, former president of Oakwood, former GC president, called Protest in Progress. The situation was exacerbated by the vice president for the General Conference from North America, for the North American division, being sent to Washington First Church to preach after the uproar of Lucy Byard, and basically in his sermon telling them to kind of suck it up, and that didn't go well at all, and so there was a group of exceptionally educated, especially for that day, Black people in Washington First Church. Eva B. Dykes, who those of you who went to Oakwood recognize that name. She was the first Black woman to finish the requirements for a PhD. She was a member of that church. There was, as I understand it, the second woman to finish the requirements for a PhD went to that church as well. They formed the Black Adventist version of the NAACP, and they petitioned the General Conference with their grievances. The Seventh-day Adventist Church was very segregated. Andrews University, whose seminary I attended, was segregated. The housing was segregated. The cafeteria was segregated. Even the General Conference cafeteria was segregated in those days. And so this group said enough. And the church, and this is a very important fact, especially for I need to say that even though there are some ugly truths that I'm sharing, I don't mean any disrespect to my Anglo brothers. Your president was a good friend of mine. President Louis and Carolyn were good friends of my wife and I when we were in South Central. In fact, Elder President Louis started off in education. He was my children's principal. And I spoke at his school several times before he made his way on up the administrative ladder. But so I don't mean any disrespect when I tell these ugly truths, but that's how the church was in those days. And they just said enough. And what people need to understand was Black people did not vote regional conferences. That was a general conference vote. The General Conference had a choice between full integration and regional conferences. And it was the vote of the church that said, instead of full integration, we're going to have regional conferences. So that's kind of how it started. Shortly after the Lucy Byard incident, the first regional conference, which was Lake Region, was formed. That was followed by Northeastern, and then by Allegheny, Elder Dr. Freeman. That was the third one. They were all formed closely together within about 3 or 4 months of each other.
Okay. Any other thoughts you want to add to that? I don't know, Dr. Freeman, you got any additional background that surfaces as you listen to this story that you want to add?
Yes, I would like to add that one of the great things about regional conferences is that it has been a hub for the development of Black leadership within our church. So when you think of our current North American division president, he came out of Central States. conference. And so if it may be, so one of the things that we see is that if we didn't necessarily have regional conferences, similar to when I always parallel it to historically Black colleges, if we did not have our own institutions, many times we would not have the opportunity to develop our leadership gifts. And so because we have regional conferences, it has allowed for Black leadership to flourish and to develop. And if you are if you are a proponent of moving up in the system, then you would have to agree that individuals like Elder Rock and others wouldn't have been able to necessarily been able to move up to the General Conference as a vice president, Delbert Baker and others, if there were not opportunities at the regional conference level to hone and develop their gifts and talents as leaders.
And Elder Johnson, and I'll stop talking after this. Let me add to what Elder Freeman said. Of the nine unions in the North American divisions, 4 of them are led by African Americans, 3 of which got their start in regional conferences, including the 2 largest, Southern Union, which is led by Dr. Ron Smith, and Pacific Union, which is led by Dr. Ricardo Graham. Both of those gentlemen, along with Maurice Valentine in Lake Union, got their start in regional conferences. And I would dare say it's very possible none of them would have been in the ministry, period, if it weren't for, it's very possible that they would have been in the regional conferences, period. They wouldn't be in the work, period, if it weren't for regional conferences.
So, Pastor Willis, I know you're a student of this history. Any thoughts you want to add to that?
I think the only thing I would add is, Lucille Bayard, from my understanding of the history, was, and I don't think Elder Emmons meant it this way. I'm just clarifying. That was not just one event that happened and people just got upset. It was almost like a fever pitch event. There have been various events that happened historically. And I think we got to go back as far as Ellen White's sermon in 1890, Our Duty to the Colored People. And for all those who are watching, when she says colored, she's not using it in a derogatory way. That's just the vernacular of her day. Our duty to the colored people, that called for the necessity of the church to go down to the South and minister, in which Elder Edmonds' family came to the faith through that clarion call. But it seems to me, as I sit back and think about it even more, that it's almost, the formation of regional conferences to a certain extent should have been expected, because Ellen White called for years for people to go down to the South, and the church was consistently reluctant in responding to that missionary mission call. And so, in essence, as Elder C.M. Kenny, as my great grandfather U.S. Willis, as Pastor R.O. Bradford, and the like, were calling people into the church, to a certain extent, they were calling them into a burning building where they knew there was going to be hostility towards them. And so it's not a surprise these issues came up eventually. It was inevitable, because it wasn't as if the church really wanted to go and bring us in initially. But praise God that he used men like Edson White and other missionaries to go down to the South to reach many of our families to eventually come to the church.
So you're describing a time frame in the 40s and 50s where, while this is going on in the Adventist Church, there are a lot of things that are happening in society in the United States. How would you describe that I guess I'll call it that intersection of things? So we were hearing Elder Evans talk about the vote to, I guess I'll use the term segregate um, churches, and which we then call them regional conferences, as opposed to integrate the Adventist Church. And we're seeing similar things happening, you know, in the early 50s, 1954, and what have you, around the country. Can anybody address what that sort of crossover looked like, or felt like, or how it impacted the church at that time? Oh,
Wanted to test first. Can everyone hear me?
yeah, we can hear you much
How are we
better.
on sound? Okay. All right. So please just throw a hand up or something if it's not good. Well, so a brief recap, because Evan made me aware that my sound was choppy. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, was raised in Lake Region Conference, attended Oakwood University, studied theology and English, and very much so the vast majority of my spiritual formation is credited to regional conferences by far. Now, I find it interesting that that's your segue right at this moment, because that is exactly what I was thinking about. My mind was already shifting to, we need to talk about the larger context. I think we've done a good job of naming the specific history to Adventism, but as much as people tend to, or I would say as much as it is a habit or within our culture denominationally to discuss our church as separate from the world, the reality is we have red blood flowing through our veins. We have eyes and ears and minds that absorb what is happening around us, whether we like it or not. And the only issue in that is if we don't acknowledge that. And so this is very much so a part of a larger history. Obviously, this is why you brought it up. And the main thing that was on my mind is that the lack of proper education within the majority of our school systems. And when I say our, I'm just talking about America in general, not even just specifically Adventist, when it comes to racism, when it comes to the history of Black people in general, the entire diaspora, when it comes to the identity, the racial identity formation in this country, the way it's facilitated is extremely hostile towards Black people. And one of the ways that it is hostile is not only spewing direct hatred, but it's also by hiding information. It's also by propagating ignorance. And I don't think that that's talked about enough. There's a lot of emphasis on, you know, directly using slurs, etc. But ignorance is also violent. Because what we don't know does in fact kill us, and it can lead us to killing other people very easily. And so the reason why these various ministers who have been named wouldn't be most likely in ministry, and if they were, definitely not in our denomination, is because of that. The reason why, as Evan mentioned, or Pastor Willis mentioned, calls were made over and over and over again to do missionary work, to reach out not only to Black people down south, but also up north. And what was the response? The response was discomfort, apprehension, disgust, you know, various things, because of the racial identity formation that takes place in this country being so profoundly racist and anti-Black. And so I think we have to kind of lean into talking about the historical narrative that is painted at large, as well as the psychological effects of that, and why within this conversation people typically lean towards, as Beth mentioned, they typically lean towards viewing regional conferences as the scar or the issue, or that is the point of embarrassment, rather than viewing it within a framework of deep grief, that it has been absolutely vital and necessary for the sanity and the spiritual formation and the social health of Black people within the Seventh-day Adventist Church to have regional conferences to protect us from the internalized messages of white Adventists.
So that takes me back to another question here. So we're going to come back to this because I asked that question because it's like we are at another inflection point. There have been other inflection points, I guess, since then, but we're sort of seeing that crossover again today that we were describing in the 1940s and 50s. But let me go on to another question. So as you describe the outcomes of having regional conferences, we talk about spawning or giving a place for great leaders to develop, which is great. But certainly that wasn't the original intent of having regional conferences. So what was the original goal, if you will, of having regional conferences? And they're probably two sides to this question, or two answers, or two aspects of this answer. There's probably one with respect to the administrative piece and the structure of getting the gospel out and reaching people and all of that. There was an unintended consequence, which was the leadership piece, which I'm sure was probably not a part of the original goal. But just talk a little bit about, so what was the goals? I mean, every time we do something as an administrative group, we have some reason in mind. So what were the goals there?
Well, I think we should look at it two ways. One, I think the goal for Black Adventists was they wanted a official anti-racist statement that validated their humanity, that they were seen as humans within this church, right? Because they wanted full inclusion. They wanted the rights to vote, the rights to sit, the rights to eat. And so what we wanted was to just be treated like children of God and like family. Instead, we were told, go and start your own. And so I think the intention on the other side was, if you look at the wealth gap in America, if you look at how much less valuable Black income is than white income, that the assumption was we weren't going to be able to survive. We would come back begging to be put back in the place in which we were rightfully, in their eyes, rightfully belong. And so I think we were set out to learn a good lesson so we can learn to come back under our proper support system. And what actually happened is, I think we were given space to dream and have vision for what we actually can do and be within this denomination.
So what started as a scar, then sort of became this success story that Elder Edmonds and Dr. Freeman have talked about. Tell us a little bit about just the growth of Adventism as a result of regional conferences.
Well, I'm trying not to to talk more than anybody else, but I suppose since I deal with that, I suppose that would be my answer. I mean, my question to answer. I mean, the reality is, and again, I don't mean this in any in any disrespect to our state conference brethren. I mean, we're all in this together, as Elder Grissom said. The whole idea is what's best for mission. And regional conferences have demonstrated their worth in terms of mission. Right now, regional conferences make up roughly 25% of the entire North American division. And then when you add in people of African descent that are in state conferences, whether that's on the West Coast where Dr. Freeman is, or in state conferences like Carolina, when you add the people of the African people of African descent to the people to the people who are in regional conferences, the largest group, the largest demographic in the North American division are people of African descent. As a matter of fact, the largest group of people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, period, are people of African descent. And that's not known, but it's true. And so that alone validates the need for regional conferences. Regional conferences started out with Black people being a very small part of the church, no money, no leadership positions, and now in North American division, the largest demographic group, not a majority, but the largest demographic group are people of African descent. And so I think that kind of answers your question right there.
So when we talk about the Adventist Church being a global movement, what I think I hear you say is you trace that back directly to the impact of regional conferences.
I trace it, I don't know if you were able to finish your question, but I trace it to two things. In North America, I trace it to regional conferences. On the continent of Africa, where the largest single group of Seventh-day Adventists are, I trace it to Africans being allowed by the church finally to work for their own people from an administrative position on down. For a long time, the work in Africa was run by Europeans and Americans. It was when Africans were given the responsibility to work for their own people that the work in Africa exploded. And the reality is, it is always easier to win people of your own culture. Now, that isn't to say that that's the only way, but that's the easier way.
Can I add something? It's interesting that in the U.S., the African American population is around 13% of the total population, but in the Adventist Church, the population is higher than that. And I think that's a beautiful thing because that speaks as a church of our diversity. I'm privileged to be at a church in a state conference that is extremely diverse, and I absolutely love that about our church. And I love that I can go to anywhere in America and find that diversity in our church, where I don't see that in most denominations outside of Adventism. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. It's sad that there has been racial tension and racial division and stuff like that, and even in our church. But I think that the growth from the minority people in America has spoken well to their demonstration of how to spread the gospel, and that's a beautiful thing.
Okay. So I'm hearing great stories of the impact and success of regional conferences. So, in my world, there's this thing that says, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So why is this question on the table? Why are people asking the question, why do we still need regional conferences? If we can actually point to this kind of an impact, this kind of global and North American impact, what does this question say about us?
Can you clarify a little bit? Well, Esperance, did you have something you were saying?
No, go ahead.
I was saying, can you clarify the question a little bit? Are you saying the fact that we're asking this question, what does it say about us, or?
Yes, as people, as Adventists, we're pointing to all of these wonderful things that have come out of having regional conferences, and the question comes up: periodically, and we're exploring it now. So, what's the relevance of regional conferences? Should we get rid of regional conferences? I mean, why are we asking a question about something that seems to be so successful?
Yeah, I was reading some articles online, and one from Spectrum magazine about 5 years ago, talking about the explanation of why there's regional conferences, and there was a petition started previously to get rid of the regional conferences or to integrate. The interesting thing is that at the time, out of the 1,500 signatures when this article was written, most of them were Caucasian. So I would suggest that one of the main reasons this comes up is that white guilt that was brought up earlier. A lot of people feel like, oh, we are segregated, and so we need to get rid of this because I feel bad about it. But like I said, we need to be maybe asking the question is, what is the mission and the representation, rather than do we just get rid of this so that we feel better?
I also think it's a question that comes from a privileged position. And by that, I mean, this week, Breonna Taylor, the officers, they got one indictment, and it was on wanton endangerment. 2 officers did not get indicted. And the question is, if you were in a white congregation, was anything said about it? Because what people have alluded to, and this happened when I was in seminary, we're watching black blood spilled in the street, and we go to class now, no one said anything. When we're in church, no one's saying anything, because it's like I think maybe it's probably rooted in a lack of comfort, not knowing what to say, but it can come off as indifference. I don't have the privilege of going the next day like nothing happened, because I wear that on me every day. And so if someone doesn't see why there's still racial tension, doesn't see that there's still racial tension in our nation globally, it's because a space of privilege. And the reality is, in our mission to go out into the world, it's very likely that it's very hard for a white man or white woman to go into a black community and to talk to them about, the 3 angels message and the 7-day Adventist truths we have to share. And they would feel comfortable coming to a white congregation. Beverly Daniel Tatum wrote a book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? The one thing about the black church that is comforting in seasons like this is that I know, everywhere else I have to, be on guard a little bit. Everywhere else I have to make sure I don't look suspicious, make sure my hands are in my pocket. When I come to church, that's one of the few times when I feel like, I can finally put the guard down. And so if for people who've not been around a lot of black people and have seen the black experience, especially when things like this go on, they don't think there's a need for this to exist. But for those who do, they understand, hey, there's something going on there, and there's a community there that is very authentic and very powerful that allows us to get through the week as we go through the mess we go through just being black in this country.
I would like to add that in connection with what has already been shared, I do believe that another layer of the issue is a gross misinformation within our society in regards to the definition of diversity, as well as the definition of segregation. For example, Los Angeles is one of the demographically most international, most multi-ethnic, most diverse cities in the US by far. And it is also extremely segregated. And that has been intentionally done by civil engineers in how they placed highways, when it comes to redlining. And when I speak of that, I'm speaking to a history of bankers deciding which areas non-white people and specifically black people would be allowed to even purchase homes, let alone start businesses, etc. So that's just an example of this contract, or this tension in the issue of how we use these terms, because I know there are many people who are natives to the area I'm in right now, that are native to LA, et cetera, that would say, oh, it's amazing here. It's so wonderful. I love how diverse it is. I love how, everyone, you see so many different kinds of people. But simply seeing various kinds of people within the umbrella of a particular context does not mean that you are diverse in regards to who holds power, in regards to the culture, what culture is accepted and what culture is ostracized. There's a whole list of things that are dynamics within communities, that simply having bodies in a space that look different does not equal diversity and kumbaya, and we have made it over to a post-racial society. Which brings me to another point in this conversation, or this particular question, is very much so connected to white guilt. It's very much so connected to, I'm trying to remember the exact word that you used, Evan. Goodness, it just left my mind. But anyway, it's connected. Privilege, thank you. Yes, it's very much so connected to white guilt as well as white privilege. The use of these terms in a way to bolster the rationale to maintain what has always been, just in different ways. And so, for example, at Andrews University, which Evan mentioned, his experience, some of his experience there, I also experienced within that context, from a different angle. I wasn't a student, I was staff, experienced what it was like to be within an allegedly diverse, one of the most multicultural universities in the United States of America. And I experienced what it was like to be there while Ferguson was literally on fire, while Mike Brown was shot dead in the street and left to bleed out, while Freddie Gray was brutally murdered in the back of a truck by police officers, etc. Very long list. And to see what the response was, to see and to feel what the atmosphere was like, was absolutely traumatizing. I will not mince words about that, because it was a combination of certain individuals that seemed willing to have conversations. They even seemed open to learning, open to evolving, but truly were still so enraptured in their own white guilt that even within the conversation, they were not truly open to receiving anything that I shared, no matter how I said it. I could say it gentle, I could repeat myself, you can try all these different angles, but at the end of the day, when someone is in self-preservation mode of their own identity, which they have been raised in this country to cling to for survival, because having the identity of white gives you access to resources to live and survive in this country in various ways, what I say doesn't really matter much. Even a video of, Black persons being shot and killed in various ways doesn't really matter much. And this is happening at a quote unquote diverse, one of our most diverse schools, because culturally, Andrews University is white. The dominant culture in terms of what is okay, what is acceptable, who's in power, who makes decisions, what type of language is idealized, etc., the curriculum, etc., it is white. And that's not specific to Andrews. That is specific to the vast majority of any educational institution that is not a historically Black university. And just because it's an Adventist school does not make it exempt from that phenomenon. And it propagates this issue by reinforcing the psychology to protect one's whiteness and white, and repel as much white guilt, quelch it as much as possible.
So that takes me back to the question I was asking earlier, where we were looking at the 40s and 50s and seeing that crossover of what was happening in society and the condition of things and our reaction to things in the church. We're kind of seeing that play out again now. Here we are, we're talking about Adventism and all of this, but then we're seeing certain things happening in the street, and we're seeing that crossover and it's spilling over into discussions in our congregations, in our schools. Not as much as it probably should be, but there's that connect that's taking place. So let me just go ahead, Dr. Freeman.
Yes, I wanted to add something to the questions. I wanted to thank Esperanza for her comments, and I wanted to kind of build on that. Um, but from a different angle, one of the challenges that we find in regional conferences related to its growth, a lot of it is related to immigration of others from the broader diaspora. So people from Africa and individuals from the Caribbean. And so a part of this discussion also is that many of our Caribbean and other immigrants that come to this country don't have a true understanding of the history of regional conferences, why they are in existence. Another issue is our theology, and so although Adventism has a holistic theology, there is not enough emphasis in the areas of equity, justice, and liberation. Those are areas in which we talk about diversity in broad terms, but we don't talk about justice as a pillar of who we are and what we do. Equity as a core pillar of who we are and what we do. And so our white brethren are not necessarily because that's not taught in our schools. That's not preached from our pulpits. We as black people, it's hard for us to it's we may hear it in our pulpits, and I can say this with authority because I've actually been a member of South Central Conference, Allegheny East Conference, and now Upper Columbia Conference. So I've been in both on both sides of this thing, and I don't see where our white brothers and sisters are getting this education. So why this question keeps coming up? We don't have general conference leadership that is stepping up and saying that some of these things are wrong. We're essentially leaving it to the division level. And so those are some things that need to change, or we're going to continue to have some of these questions pop up because we don't understand the history and because people are able to just stay in their silos. Some of these things still continue to, some of these questions can continue to be asked.
And I think that, and this has just been my experience when we have unity days or unity functions, there's a clear microaggression as it relates to whose opinions are more valuable than others. And I think the GC refrains from saying anything because I feel as if the GC has prioritized who is more valuable based upon who they feel brings more dollars in. And I mean, without equivocation, the reality is they face pressure with support and from other things from certain individuals within the context of our church who try to use political gains with money, saying, you shouldn't be saying this. There are plenty of people who independent ministries. I think about Elder Ty. I can't remember his say it, Sydney. You're on mute.
Gibson.
Ty Gibson. Yes, he talked about how
Ty Gibson.
He talked about how he started talking about these issues in our society, and one of his donors said, "Why you bring that up? You don't need to bring that up. If you keep bringing it up, I'm going to stop supporting." And so there's an assumption that if we say too much, this is my personal take. You know, I don't know our leaders at a close, intimate level, so this is just my take. That if they say too much, then they get a lot of blowback and possibly lose ties. And on top of that, I mean, if you look at the statement that that was put out, which was very all lives matter statement, they are trying to play a line so as not to upset. I don't want to say the word upset a base that they don't want to lose.
So
And,
Pastor, go ahead.
and I think this leads to the question, something someone put in the chat box. I just want to bring it up. This says, is money and control of finances a factor that pushes for unification? Is this the elephant in the room question or fake news?
So I just very quickly, I want to throw in there, and it will help very much so with answering this question. There's a book, highly recommend. Of course, it depends on your background, et cetera, in terms of whether or not you'd be ready to jump straight into this. So be wise. But a text called Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. And one of his main points from the whole book, and it is a thick text, but I can summarize the highlight for you, is that the concept and the power structure of racism was developed for the purpose of economic control. It's always been about money. Like, he is literally historically able to track that it's not that there was racism prior to the establishment of the structures within our American society. And then, you know, suddenly finances along the way just got entangled in racist structures. He's saying, no, people who were white and also who were wealthy wanted to make sure that they could maintain what they were stealing and taking from Black people as well as Indigenous. They wanted to make sure that they could maintain that. And in order to maintain that, they needed to make sure that their white brethren that were not wealthy remained on their side. And so they said, okay, this can't just be a class thing. It has to be something else. And from that greed and that desire for control, specifically when it comes to money, came what we now acknowledge as racism or systemic racism, et cetera. And so the answer to your question is absolutely emphatically yes. That is in the bones of this structure, and it's in the DNA of how generation upon generation upon generation has been socialized, has been raised, how their psychology has been shaped. And that doesn't make anyone by default a terrible person. We're just talking about context. You know, if you are born, not you as in a person, but, you know, let's put an example in terms of within nature. You know, if a particular fish is born in water that is contaminated, that has pollution, that has et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you know, whose fault is it that this fish is now sick or misguided when it comes to what places are safe and how, et cetera, et cetera. This is about just the environment that our denomination, that the people within this denomination throughout our history have been living in, have been brought up. And where the issue lies is when confronted with this information, what is your response? Are you open and assertive and intentional about very humbly acknowledging, you know what, I can't do anything about who I was born as, to what family, what country, what context, what toxins I have just automatically absorbed. I can't do anything about that, but what I can do is, as people have helped me now to be aware, and to be aware because of my own curiosity to listen and to absorb what is shared with me, you know, then when you are the person who is holds more power within the hierarchy, and in this case, that is white people, especially wealthy white people, it's on you. It's your responsibility. It's your journey. It's your work of healing. We use this similar language around sin a lot in a very general sense, where it's like, yeah, the sins of the world are around us, but we're trying to be in the world, but not of the world. And we do these different spiritual practices and disciplines and engage in various spiritually nurturing, you know, communal practices to try to rid ourselves by the power of the Holy Spirit, the effects, the impacts, the misguidance of sinful influence. Racism is included in that.
You know, Elder Johnson, let me go at it from another perspective. I certainly am not as eloquent as the last two speakers are. They've summarized it brilliantly. But I think there's another side to it. I literally, until COVID-19 hit, I was in a different church every week in a different part of the country, talking about these issues, and mostly, although not exclusively, in African American churches. I've led this discussion in, for example, the Kentucky-Tennessee camp meeting, you know, at Madison Campus Church, which is the largest church in the Kentucky-Tennessee Conference. So I've had this discussion with Caucasians as well. But I remember, Dr. Freeman, being in your old conference at Allegheny East, not too far from where you grew up. I think you grew up with I think your pastor was my good friend, Pastor Leggett. Yeah, I was in his wedding. But I was not far from where you grew up. And I was making this, we were having the same discussion in a Black church. And I was getting argued down by an elder in a regional conference church who was Black, who said we need to get rid of regional conferences. So it's not all money. It is very difficult to argue with let's all come together, you know, because on the face of it, you know, there are all kinds of well-meaning, good intention white people, and also some Black people who say, you know, I hear it in Black churches. There's not going to be a Black heaven. There's not going to be a white heaven. Why can't we all come together? Not understanding that in the United States and in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, coming together means. It doesn't mean we have diversity in our church. You know, we kind of brag about our diversity, but the only reason why we have diversity is people of color go to churches and institutions of majority culture. That diversity door only swings one way. You know? And we have defined diversity as the presence of the majority culture. So if you have the majority culture, you're diverse. The fact of the matter is, in that same church, not too far from where you grew up, Dr. Freeman, there were people from all different countries and cultures. They were very diverse, but in the Adventist church, they were not considered diverse because there were no people from the majority culture. And so what happens is this one-way diversity, this one-way integration has really led to resegregation. Because what happens is, if enough people, and no matter how much we triumph diversity, if enough people of color come to a majority culture institution, the majority culture almost always leaves. And so, for example, you have one whole conference, Greater New York, which once was a Caucasian conference in the largest city in the country, where there are no more Caucasian churches. And so so when we talk about coming together sounds good, but it requires a difficult conversation. And Elder Grissom, I want to affirm you, because it's some of the things that we're talking about are uncomfortable. But in order for us to really come together, we have to have the kinds of uncomfortable conversations that we have not been willing to have in our church and in our country.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think we've got to be willing to get uncomfortable. And frankly, if I'm 100% just out there, I think some of obviously the biggest issues that we are having are in our white churches, or in the state conferences, and in where we're just part, like, I really so much appreciate us talking about this in the context of the historical context. And, you can't do that and not think about today, which, unfortunately, I love more than anything the whole coming together kumbaya moments. I mean, that's my dream and hope. And I love the ideas of us all, being together. But the facts of the matter are, if you look at our country, we're not there. And we're not, we've got a lot of work to do. And this is hard, but man, we've got to be there for it and be willing to go through the hard. And, I really passionately believe that this is a massive issue that we've got to be willing to tackle, because our entire message as a church and everything that we do, it loses its relevance if we're not able to deal with this. And if we're not able to talk about this, and if we're not able to grow, and if we're not able to, come out the other side better off, where we're really listening to one another and we're really learning or really growing. And look, I told you, I'm 5th and 6th generation Seventh-day Adventist. And to really begin to even understand about regional conference is a very new thing. I mean, obviously I knew they existed, but that was it. And that's sad. I mean, Elder Edmund, I think you need to be in every white church, going forward. I mean, we need to know about this, because there's such incredible beauty in this story where God's message is not only beautifully being spread and growth is happening, but leaders are being developed. I mean, if you need examples of what God is doing, it's all through it and through the history. And if anything, that should be one of the most encouraging things that shows us, even when we are so awful and when things have not been great, listen, the Lord is still going to prevail, right? And the message is still going to get out there and keep going. And so it's a beautiful thing that we need to be talking more about. So, and don't apologize for it being hard. I don't know about everybody, but I'm here for it.
So let me just play with a couple of words that the panel has thrown out there. So one is privilege. We've been talking about privilege. And one of the things that seems to surface every time I have one of these conversations is, privilege is a way, people of privilege, or the group that has privilege, is the group that has control over the conversation. They get to determine what you talk about, what you don't talk about, how long you talk about it. So if you've got privilege, you can say, hey, yeah, this is a conversation we really need to get engaged in. And the fact that we are not having these kinds of conversations in a broad way suggests that the group that has the privilege really has not embraced the need to bring these conversations to the surface as much as we should. Okay, so that's one part. But the other word that you've been throwing out there is the word guilt. And that's kind of an interesting word because guilt implies that you know what you did. You know, Adam and Eve were guilty. They knew what they did. You know, you get charged with a crime, you get convicted of it, and you're found guilty. You know what you did. When you start talking about this kind of thing, what I often find is that groups say, I didn't do anything. You know, I wasn't around. I didn't even know the history of it. I didn't even know regional conferences existed. So how can you talk about uh, white guilt? You know, guilt about what? You know, so what does that look like? How does that play into the discussion? So is it really white guilt, or is it really something else? And here's just something else that I'll throw in there that you were kind of alluding to a minute ago, Beth, and that is, so as a church with the quote unquote truth, are we afraid that if we admit that the church really is a reflection of society, and that just because there is some equality in the church doesn't mean that there is not racism in the church? Just because there's equality in society doesn't mean that there's not racism in society. Are we afraid that if we admit that we've got that to work on, that somehow that calls into question, you know, the who we are, the people of God, you know, the message? You know, people are saying, hey, if you are who you say you are, then why aren't you doing this whole kumbaya thing? So talk to me about that a little bit.
Well, let me jump in. I think it's always difficult for the people, and I'll deal with the privilege thing because I think we kind of lost you there for a second. We lost all of us for a second. I think let me deal with the privilege thing. I think it's always difficult for the people with privilege to see the privilege. So let me go to take Elder Grissom off the hook a little bit. Let me go at it from a gender perspective. As a male, there's male privilege in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. There just is. It's way easier to be a male leader in the church than it is to be a female leader. So once I acknowledge that, it's easier for me to do something about it. You know, but we have a hard, the people who have privilege, whether it's privilege of color or privilege of gender, have a hard time. In my experience, we have a hard time owning the fact that there's privilege, and until I own it, then I'm not willing to fix it. So that's part of the problem, and I think sometimes, and you know, I'm jumping into Dr. Esperanza. I don't want to mess up your last name. Is it Jean? Is that right? Is it Jean? I wanted Jean. Okay, I wanted to put Janae, or I was going to put an accent on there some kind of way. Okay, so this is your area, sociology and all that kind of stuff. But I just think I think it's difficult for people. I think that people who have privilege don't even know they have privilege. You know, as a male, it took me it took me years to figure out that from in society and in the church, there are, especially relative to Black women, I have privilege. You know, it's easier to be a Black male than it is to be a Black female. It just is. And that's true in the church. And until we own that, we're not going to fix it. As long as I don't own it, then I think whatever problems you have as a female is your fault. It's not my fault. It's your fault. You're not where you are You're not where I am because you're not as smart. You didn't work as hard, blah, 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 blah. You know, and there's just an unwillingness to even talk about it. You know, we have leaders in our country who say, let's not even talk about systemic racism. It doesn't exist. Well, how do you fix it if you have, and then while they're saying it, they have followers who, you know, who are in the amen corner. Yeah. We don't have systemic racism. So it's hard for the people, and I don't think it's all because they're bad people. I think that's what Dr. Jean was saying. It's not necessarily that all of them are bad people. It's just that we have a system that's baked in our society, and it's hard for us to unbake it.
All right, so I'm hearing you. Yeah, we are a part of society. The other thing that's kind of interesting to me is society seems to be, well, as Christians, we have been given the task as a church of being the conscience of society. And I feel more and more that society is imposing its conscience on us rather than us being able to stand up and say, we need to address these issues. That we're being dragged into the discussion by society as opposed to pointing out the way things should be going as a result of our Christianity and our beliefs. So I don't know if there's there, but I'll just leave that out there and get your thoughts on it.
So I did a presentation at the NAD Education Summit 2 years ago, 2018. And I think a part of the church's issue, when I say church, I don't mean the Adventist church, I think churches in general. A part of our issue is that we see ourselves as the moral ethos of society. And the reality is, because of that, that is a position that blinds you to your own areas where you are not doing well, or at least gives you the ability sometimes not to admit what you need to do better. And so, you know, we use these statements, we're in the world, not of the world. And I would say, even as Adventists, this statement, we have the truth, blinds us to the issues that we still have to address in our own backyard. And so it's not that I expect the church to come down to us, right? That's not what I expect. I appreciate having high moral expectations of my leaders. I appreciate having the ability to look to a higher standard. But I also appreciate a church that's honest enough to say, we have messed up and we have to do better. And I don't think most people are mad at the church for the church's indiscretions. I think the anger that's boiling up towards the church is for its indiscretions and the lack of accountability they're willing to demonstrate, and the lack of times they're willing to admit, hey, we don't have it all good here. And we, you know, I think millennials and Generation Z accept and embrace imperfection because we know we're not perfect. It's hard, you know, it's hard to be in a relationship with someone who blames you for everything you do wrong and never takes a moment to admit what they've done wrong. And so I think that we're blinded by our own truth, fail to realize how human we are in our quest to be more like God every day. And I think that we would do better if we just came out and said, here's where we failed and here's where we need to go.
I completely agree with everything that Evan just shared. Forgive me, I did miss the question or the comment that you just made just before Evan spoke, Elder Johnson. So my mind is still stuck on what Elder Edmund shared. So feel free to redirect if need be, of course. You just said so many good things, Elder Edmond. You just said so many good things in terms of the way that these terms are discussed in terms of in diagnosing and trying to diagnose, like, where exactly is the issue? Where is the pressure point? Like, what is it that's really happening? Is it the guilt? Is it privilege? Is it this? Is it that? And the first thing that came to my mind was that it's very much so a which comes first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing, because the response to any degree of insight into one's privilege, the response is what is where the guilt comes in, because you're presented with this information that, hey, you have more power in this dynamic and you are not using it well. And when the response is, well, no, that's not me, that's you. And when it's defensiveness, that is rooted in guilt. That is rooted in shame. So it's like white guilt is very much so embedded or best seen in that reaction in response to information. And so it begs the question, what is the degree of awareness when it comes to one's privilege truly? Because of course our minds are extremely complex, and we have conscious aware thought and we have subconscious thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. And so something that came to my mind was activist and longtime educator Jane Elliott, who is very much so a white woman, does this exercise where you can Google her, you can see various recordings on YouTube, et cetera. One specific exercise that she does that I think is extremely helpful in this conversation is that she has a group of white people in a room, and she'll ask a variety of questions. And one question that she asks that's very pointed is that she says, okay, now, if anyone would be okay with being treated how Black people are treated in America, like if you would be good with, pretty much stepping into the skin of a Black person right now in the United States, she asked them to do some gesture, whether it be stand up or raise your hand or sit down, etc. And without exception, no one moves, because there is a level of instinctual awareness that, wait a minute, I may not be acknowledging this on a conscious level, but my body freezing up is telling me I don't want any part of that. So it's that back and forth. It's that back and forth that I don't think needs to be completely clarified. I think the complexity of our minds, et cetera, like it can be muddy. Like, okay, is it privilege? Is it guilt? Is it this? That's fine. It honestly doesn't really matter. What matters is, are you going to be humble enough? Will you be intentional enough? Will you be assertive enough to engage in a journey of undoing the teachings and the shaping that have brought you to a place of misusing your power? Because that's what people are really talking about when they confront you about white privilege. It's about having power that you are misusing. And by being consciously oblivious or ignorant, and for some people it can be argued as to whether or not you're truly ignorant or willfully ignorant, that's a whole other conversation. That does not absolve you of how that power is used. It just makes you dangerous in a different way, because you're not even aware of the things that you're carrying with your body and with your words, etc. So that's one really quick thing. And then when it comes to Elder Johnson, you mentioned, certain conversations not even being willing to be had, etc. There's also another level of the issue of lack of implementation, because there is a brand of white racism that loves to have these conversations. I mean, bring the food, bring the church potluck punch, bring all the things, and let's sit and talk, and let's record it and share it with the masses. Let's have sit downs, etc. To have this conversation, which then often the white persons who are organizing it and listening feel satiated in their guilt, where it's just like, yes, look at us, we did good, we had a conversation, right? We talked, we invited Black people, and we let them talk for an hour. Yes, so there's levels of issues to this. So ultimately, so to speak, the proof is in the pudding. It's like, okay, where's the implementation? Where are the action steps? Where's the intentionality? Just having conversations is not sufficient. It can be a helpful tool, but only if one allows it to be.
Yeah, I like to say, obviously actions speak louder than words. So we need to quit just talking and start doing.
So, one of the interesting things that was showing up in the films we're looking at over the past few nights is for many groups of privilege, this is a topic. This is an area of study. And what that implies is that when you have an area of study, you can choose when to study it, when not to study it. You can pick it up when you want to. You can put it down when you want to. But for people of color, it's not an area of study. It's a way of life. We're always dealing with this. I often ask in some of the sessions that I have with groups. So first of all, how do you identify yourself? Okay, Black, white, Asian, whatever that is, fill in that blank. But then the question is, so how many times during the course of the day do you think about being what that is? And white groups sit there with this blank stare and they say, so what do you mean by that? Black people are writing feverishly. I think about it when I get up in the morning. I decide, so how am I going to wear my hair today? Am I going to do dreads? I'm going to do natural. What kind of car am I going to buy? Is it going to be too flashy? Am I going to look like I'm a pimp or this or that? So what kind of clothes am I going to wear? So this whole question is always playing out with certain groups. It's not just a topic where we can come together and just talk about it. We need to understand that it's a part of the fabric of who we are as a society and as a church. Okay? So if you think about, the relationship between, let's say, state and regional conferences. So we've talked about the success stories, the impact of regional conferences over the years, over the decades. We obviously know of the impact and the successes of state conferences. What would that look like? If we actually could figure out what that crossover, what that collaboration could be, should be. Just imagine for a minute what that story might look like. How might that play out? What do we have that we're missing? I guess I'll use the analogy of waves coming together. Two waves can actually occupy the same space at the same time. And when those waves come together, they're in phase. There's a big wave that kind of emerges. It's called superpositioning. So what would this superpositioning look like?
So I actually am very pessimistic with regards to that. That is going to happen. I actually would advocate for regional conferences and Black people to focus on ministering to our people. I have a series I've been putting on called Decolonizing the Black Evanist Mind, where the discussion is about what are the ways in which we can reconcile our Adventist identity with our culture. We've been enculturated in such a way that we can't. So there's been this term thrown out there. I know probably Elder Edmonds has probably heard of it. Sovereignty. This idea that we would be self-contained, self-led, without having to go to our white brothers and sisters to ask for permission. So in some ways, we do have autonomy within the system, right? With our own with our own conferences and things like that. But ultimately, we're part of a broader system that pushes on which we have to report to, right? And so, although I love all my brothers and sisters in Christ of whatever background, I am particularly pessimistic given I've been a student in both white Adventist schools and black Adventist schools. I'm in I'm a member of a white conference, but also have been a member of 2 regional conferences. I don't see this idealized integration happening. And so my focus, particularly for my own ministry, my focus is on, in particular, helping Black people, but not necessarily to exclusion of others. But in particular, my call is to support and help Black people prepare for the second coming of Jesus Christ.
I think, Elder Johnson, that I heard your question differently than Dr. Freeman. I'm equally pessimistic, Dr. Freeman. The way I heard though Elder Johnson's question was, if somehow it could work, what would it look like? As opposed to, I think it would work. So if some miracle happened, what would that look like? I think I do believe, as great an advocate as I am of regional conferences, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have them. We just don't live in a perfect world, and I don't see that world coming before Jesus comes. But if we did have that perfect world, one thing I think would have one benefit that we would have in the area of education. I'm talking about below the university level. All of us, regional conferences and state conferences, struggle with Adventist education on the K through 12 level. When I say struggle, I don't mean struggle to provide quality. My children are products of, in fact, my entire family is products of Adventist education. I think we do a good job, generally speaking, of educating our children. We just do a bad job telling people we do a good job. But it's a struggle to do it, and it would be, so it on some levels it doesn't make sense for both of us to struggle when in a perfect world we would educate our children together. Now that perfect world doesn't exist, but if it did, one of the first benefits would be in the area of education. It would be a lot easier to educate our children if we did it, if we could figure out a way to do it together. And I mean from a funding standpoint, Seventh-day Adventist education, to run it is enormously expensive. And if we could share that cost, then that would be beneficial.
So I guess maybe in a perfect world, we would all be together. I think where I am now, as I consider everything, I think sometimes multiculturalism is pushed as God's standard. And I just don't know if it has to be that way. You know, I have love for Elder Grisham. I have love for people over the Charlotte community, whatever conference you may be in. I have love for Democrats and Republicans. But I don't have to be in your church or your conference to still love you. And I like Black churches, just even from a non hostile standpoint. I enjoy the worship experience. I enjoy the preaching. I enjoy just the environment. And so I think people choose churches particularly around what they most like. And so I don't think they need to come together. I think that we can do a lot just in terms of having better relationships, right? Better support for one another's programs in the same city, better assistance and things of that nature. Um, so if they came together, I agree with Elder Emmons. The greatest benefit, I think, would be just from an economic standpoint for our educational institutions. But I also think there's stuff that we can do here within our regional conferences to address some of the educational disparities that we are experiencing at some of our schools. In terms of funding, when I say disparities in terms of funding our buildings, our facilities, that I think we can do by ourselves without needing assistance from other other more well-off institutions, but that's not the conversation we're going to have today.
So, testing out a different mic. Am I good? All right. Thank God. This technical has been serious today. Okay. Here. I want to preface the core of my point with an analogy. I'm sure there are many people watching this or who will be watching this who understand the difficulties we can experience within families. I'm sure there are plenty of people who are watching and listening who have themselves gone to therapy and actually seeked out professional assistance, whether it's from a therapist or you received pastoral counsel, et cetera, some kind of outside guidance to help navigate potentially a crisis or maybe just ongoing hard things and unhealthy dynamics or just full-blown dysfunction, because we're people and we have problems and we have stuff. In that journey of trying to heal within a traumatized, wounded, dysfunctional family, which I personally believe is the majority of families, but that's just me. There is a dynamic that can happen if everyone within the process is not in a space at that time of humility and openness. And the dynamic that can take place is that whoever shines a light on the dysfunction, whoever brings up, hey, I think we need help. Like, I think we need to get help because I think we have some problems here. Like, you know, let's work this out. Let's talk this through. Like, you know, I want to be in healthy relationship with each other, but I think we need some help because things aren't right. There's this dynamic of, or the term is used of scapegoating, where it's like, it is so uncomfortable to even sit with this, for lack of a better word, revelation or exposure of issues or naming, acknowledging of pain and wounds and imperfections, that some people at certain stages of healing just kind of recoil into like, oh no, something's wrong with you because you're throwing off how we've done things and you're making me uncomfortable. So you just have a problem. You go ahead and you go to therapy and you go to the pastor and you get prayed over because there's something wrong with you, versus there's something wrong with our dynamic. And you're letting me know, which would make this analogy more relevant to our conversation, you're letting me know that this dynamic is harmful to you. I am harming you, and you're letting me know that and saying that you want to be able to heal and move forward. But I still want to put it on you that there's something wrong with you versus there's something wrong with this dynamic and this power structure. All that to say, that is the temptation. on a societal level, on a communal level. That is a temptation to not sit with discomfort, to not want to feel uncomfortable, to be averse to our egos being challenged. And I very much so feel the need to challenge our white Adventist brothers and sisters, as we say, and I say as we say because that's a loaded term. You have to decide for yourself what kind of reaction you're going to have to the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter is everything that has been already shared about the realities of racism in America and consequently within our denomination. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has been historically missing in action whenever it comes to movements of liberation, particularly for Black people, whether that was the abolitionist movement, civil rights movement, and presently there's a lot of obviously tension over that, et cetera. There is not a good track record of the necessity even for Black liberation to be realized, and for that to be within the definition of diversity and unity and moving forward. That said, if we actually wanted to do the work, like if this was actually going to be done, and I'm not talking about an ideal world where, it just wasn't even an issue to begin with. Like if we were starting from where we are at right now, it would be extremely messy, it would be very painful, and a lot of people would be very upset. Because the only way to fix it the only way to fix an oppressive system is for the people who are in power to absolve themselves of their power. It would be complete shift. People would need to resign. Masses of white leaders within the Adventist Church would need to resign because there would have to be an entire restructuring of who gets to determine what. Even the system of how decisions are made. I mean, we would have to rebuild this thing from the ground up. If a tree is diseased and is bringing about bad fruit, etc., you don't just go prune a few little branches like, oh man, okay, let's just clip this off. You have to deal with the issue at the root. And because we have to deal with the issue at the root, because of the nature of this, that is what has to take place. Not because white people are just inherently horrible people and I am against them and I can't stand white people and I'm clearly just this angry Black woman who has nothing to do with that. It's because of the gravity of the harm. One quick little quote that I want to throw out there and then I'll stop. And I'm intentionally not saying who said this. I want, if you don't know, I want you to look it up. You might be surprised. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. Progress is healing the wound that the blow made. And they, meaning white people, haven't even pulled the knife out, much less heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there. That is the depth of the work that has to take place.
So we're approaching the end of our couple of hours here together. So it's interesting listening to how people interpreted the superpositioning analogy that I was using. And I use it because there are multiple ways of interpreting that. So the whole idea of bringing waves together is that waves don't lose their identity when they come together. They simply figure out, how do I add to the other in order to make things happen this better. Doesn't mean that we disappear. But the thing that we've done today is be willing to explore the question, and the question and the exploration of the question can be messy. But if we don't explore the question, we're going to end up someplace where we don't intend to end up. We're always on the road to somewhere, even when we think we're standing still. Either we're directing it or society is pushing us in that direction. We're on the road to somewhere, and we, as a church, have not taken time to explore or ask ourselves, so where are we going? Where is this taking us? And is that where we want to go? Just speaking from a spiritual standpoint, hey, there's a world to be saved out there. If we keep going on this road, then how does the path that we're on impact our ability to share the gospel in the way that we as a church say that we have been given to share the gospel? So, yeah, there are many dimensions to this. There's a whole societal piece, the equality piece, the racial piece, the gospel piece. And there are things that we can learn from each other if we're willing to sit and explore the question. So what do we do? And to be willing to admit the reason we're asking this question of why, the reason this question is even on the table about relevance, is that there is still this thread of racism that is running through what we call Adventism. If it weren't there, then this wouldn't be a question. So it's like going to AA. You got to start by admitting, hey, I got a problem. And when you start by at least admitting that, then you can begin to explore, so what might I do, or what might we do together in order to address that problem? So, Pastor, you're the official host here, so I'm going to turn this over to you to close this out today. Oh, you're on mute, Pastor.
I said all my best stuff before I unmuted myself. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone for being a part of this panel. Many of you, we've worked together, we've intersected in various ways, and it is just a privilege to have you consider being on the panel to enjoy this discussion. Thank you for your insights, your perspectives, and I want you guys to know that I'm praying for you in every endeavor. Thank you, Pastor Edmonds. You were with us this morning, gave us a beautiful message, and then you were with us this afternoon to help share with us your heart and your background. And we appreciate the work you do as the director of the Office of Regional Conference Ministries, as a pastor who is benefiting from your labors and from the Regional Conference plan. I appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you for all your service that you've given to this church for the last 40 years. Dr. Freeman, we go way back, probably 1999, 2000. When you were a freshman at Pine Forge. My brother was a senior, and I remember seeing you on campus to the point where you were a senior and I was a freshman at Pine Forge. Thank you for your brotherhood. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your mentorship. Esperanza, thank you so much. As a friend, we didn't go to Pine Forge together, but we went to Oakwood together, and we just had a tremendous time, and we've been through thick and thin. So thank you for sharing your insights and your perspective. Elder Grisham, thank you. We know each other the least, but you've always been a warm person. You've always been helpful. And I thank you for just your insight and your willingness to be in what could be an uncomfortable position and not, towing the company line, but saying what was on your heart. And we thank you. I look forward to working with you more and more in the future. Elder Johnson, my head elder here at Northeast, my ace boom coon, the guy who helps keep me grounded when I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do, and always a good source of wisdom. I thank you for moderating this conversation, and look forward to working with you many years into the future here at Northeast as we continue to work to do the regional conference work of working to save Black America in the Hidden Valley community and beyond. For all those who tuned in, we thank you for checking us out. We thank you for staying with us for going on 2 hours and 3, 2, 1 for being with us for 2 hours. If you enjoy the content which we share, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, to like our Facebook page and subscribe to our Facebook page. We have things going on all the time as we continue to expand our digital ministry. And on next week, for those of you who don't know, we're going to be kicking off a sermon series called An Egyptian Horror Story. And so, check us out next week at 11 a.m. as we prepare to embark upon this homiletical, theological, spiritual journey as we look at the plagues that God rained on Egypt in his quest for justice for his people. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for my wife for being such a supportive spouse today, dealing with the kids while I was all over the place today. Couldn't be doing this without you. Thank you to Elder Edmonds. I know you left your wife and kids to be with us here in Charlotte. And so Godspeed and God's blessing as you travel back. Thank you for once again connecting with us here at Northeast, where we prioritize family, community, and fellowship. Enjoy the rest of your Sabbath. Be blessed.